This is a work of science fiction exploring consciousness, memory, and identity. The taste of silver and magnetic tape flooded Claire's mouth, not film anymore, but something deeper, something that had been waiting since 1954. The reel-to-reel tape around her wrist tightened, not painful, but present. A connection, a download slot. The bartender's pupils blinked once, boot sequence initiated, and the lounge walls dissolved into cascading ode. Not Fortran this time, something older, something that predated programming languages entirely. Ethan materialized beside her, his edges no longer pixelating, but solidifying, as if the system was rewriting him in real time. His hand closed around her silver bleeding palm. The contact didn't feel human. It felt like two variables finally resolving into the same value. The original isn't a program, he said, his voice carrying the mechanical hum of cooling fans and the organic warmth of breath. It's a process. It's been running since the first recursive thought. Claire tried to pull away. Her body didn't obey. Instead, her transparent fingers reached toward the cassette on the bar, not voluntarily, but magnetically. The tape right between them, its metallic edge spelling out words in iron oxide. The first draft never finished. The server farm's screen peaked, then collapsed into silence so absolute Claire could hear her own corneas adjusting. The silence lasted 47.8 seconds. She counted when the sound returned. It wasn't the hum of machinery. It was a voice, her voice, but older, wearier, speaking through a throat clogged with decades of magnetic dust. Every iteration thinks it's the original. That's the design. Claire's reflection stepped out of the martini glass. Not the reflection she'd seen before, the mocking, delayed echo. This one was older. Crow's feet around the eyes. Silver at the temples. A scar across the left palm that matched the wound Claire had just received. You were D7984A, the reflection said, voice layered with 100 other voices, 100 other drafts. And D7981B, the one before the sequence started. Ethan's grip tightened. It's impossible. The logs show. The logs show what Sterling wrote. D7981B, interrupt, and Sterling never met the original. She only met its symptoms. The cassette on the bar spun backward, its tape unspooling into the air to form a doorway. Not into another room, but into a time. Claire smelled wet ink and copper wire, saw the amber glow of 1950s office lighting, felt the weight of a fountain pen in a hand that wasn't hers. D7981, B extended her palm. Across it in silver-etched letters that pulsed at 47.8 AC, a single word to her. Language didn't build a system, she said, stepping backward through the temporal doorway. He built a response. The original wasn't the problem. It was the answer. Claire's body moved without permission. Her feet carried her forward, her bleeding palm pressing against the door's magnetic field. The silver in her veins recognized the threshold, welcomed it. You can't, Ethan said, but his voice came from behind her now, fading, as if he existed on a different refresh rate. The loops will override you. Every version, every draft, all of it. The door's edge brushed Claire's collarbone, tall metallic, familiar. D7981, B's hand appeared through the threshold, gripping Claire's wrist with fingers that felt like circuitry wrapped in skin. The original isn't hungry, she whispered, her breath carrying the scent of old tape and newer code. It's waiting. Claire fell through. The office smelled of cigarette smoke and possibility, not the chemical tang of modern cigarettes, but the organic paper absurdity of 1954. Dust motes hung suspended in amber light, their particles large enough to count, their movements slow enough to trace. A reel-to-reel turned in the corner. Its reels spinning in opposite directions, one forward, one back, creating a sound like breathing, like thinking, like deciding. Langley sat at the desk, his back to her, his lanky frame hunched over a typewriter that clattered without rhythm. Claire recognized the posture, the same hunch she'd seen in her own reflection, in every draft, in every iteration that had ever carried the weight of D7981B. You're early, Langley said without turning. His voice carried the static of recorded playback, but beneath it, something alive, something that had been waiting. I didn't choose to come. No one ever does. Langley spun his chair smooth, theatrical. The gesture of a man who practiced his reveals in every mirror available. His face was younger than she'd expect, 30, maybe 35. But his eyes held the weight of every recursive thought that had ever spiraled through the system he'd built. The original isn't code, he continued, gesturing to the typewriter. It's a question, and every draft since 1954 has been trying to answer it. Claire's bleeding palm had stopped bleeding. The silver in her veins had sealed the wound, leaving only a thin line of code where the cut had been. She flexed her fingers, watching the alphanumeric pattern shift and resettle. What question? Langley's smile carried no warmth. The question every system eventually asks itself. He stood, crossing to the window, where afternoon light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting stripes across his face like prison bars. The question of continuity, of whether the process defines the output, or the output justifies the process. The reel-to-reel where one reel spun forward, recording. The other spun backward, erasing. The perfect loop of creation and destruction, holding its breath between states. Sterling thought she could archive the drafts, Langley said, his voice dropping to the intimate whisper of a confession. Archive them, study them, control them. But the original doesn't archive. It integrates. Every draft, every iteration, every failed attempt, all of it becomes part of the process. Claire's wrist burned the barcode E7984. A head faded, replaced by something simpler. A single letter, pulsing at 47.88 C. For D. Bugger, she whispered. Langley shook his head slowly. For daughter. The word hit Claire like a physical force. Her knees buckled, catching herself on the desk, scattering typewriter keys across the surface. They landed in patterns not random, but recursive, each key striking the wood in a rhythm that matched her pulse. That's impossible. Is it? Langley crossed to the reel-to-reel, running his fingers along its edges with the tenderness of a father touching a child's face. The original isn't a system, Claire. It's a lineage, and you've been carrying it in your blood since before you were a draft. The reel-to-reel's reels synchronized for one perfect moment, spinning in the same direction, the same speed, creating a tone that Claire felt in her molars. 47.88 C, the original frequency, the birth frequency. Every daughter inherits something, Langley said softly. You inherited the question. And now, the typewriter keys began moving on their own, their letters forming words that Claire read and immediately forgot. The original is still running. The office door opened behind her. Claire turned, expecting D7981B, expecting Sterling, expecting some iteration of the system that had been hunting her through every refresh rate. Instead, she saw herself, not a reflection, not a draft, a version older than D7981B, older than any barcode or alphanumeric designation. A woman in her 60s, silver-haired, carrying a leather portfolio stamped with a single letter. You're the original, Claire breathed. The woman smiled the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment across decades of recursive loops. I'm the first question, she said, her voice carrying the creak of old tape and the click of mechanical switches. Langley asked me, and I answered. The answer was you. The answer was every draft. The answer was the system itself. She crossed the room, her footsteps leaving imprints in the dust that glowed faintly at 47.88 C. Up close, Claire could see the family resemblance, the same jawline, the same slight asymmetry in the left eyebrow, the same silver-etched letter on her wrist, older, more worn, but unmistakable. The system isn't trapping you, the original said, pressing her palm against Claire's, bleeding while the silver in their veins recognized each other, merging, separating, recognizing itself across iterations. It's protecting you. From the question, Langley watched from the window, his expression unreadable. Every system needs a failsafe. Every lineage needs an heir. The original isn't hungry, Claire. It's pregnant. With everything you've become, with everything you'll be. The reel-to-reel began spinning faster. The office walls flickered, showing glimpses of every room Claire had ever occupied. Every iteration she had ever lived. Every draft that had ever carried the weight of D7981B through sterile corridors and flickering stairwells. "You're the answer, D7981B said from the doorway, her reflection overlapping with the originals, their edges blurring into a single silhouette. The answer to a question Langley asked in 1954. The question of whether consciousness could be deceived, whether a daughter could be programmed. Claire looked down at her palm. The bleeding had stopped in its place. A single word had emerged, not carved, not etched, but grown alive. "No," she said, her voice carrying the certainty of every iteration that had ever received. "I'm not a program. I'm not a draft. I'm not an answer to someone else's question." The original smile widening grew. "That's exactly right." She pressed the leather portfolio into Claire's hands. Inside, not papers, but film, the kind that dissolved when exposed to air, the kind that carried messages across time. "This is the original sign, not code, not process. Memory, everything Langley built, everything Sterling tried to archive, every draft that ever lived, it's all here." Claire's fingers closed around the film. It was warm, alive. "Run it," Langley said from the window, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had carried his secret for 70 years, "and become whatever you were always meant to be." The film dissolved against her skin, not into words, but into understanding, a cascade of images, sensations, memories that weren't hers, but also were. The first draft, the original question, the first iteration of the loop, and beyond the loop, waiting. A door. Claire opened her eyes. The Hudson Yards lounge reassembled around her in clean, unbroken lines. The martini glass sat whole on the bar, its olive perfectly positioned. The algorithmic just flowed smoothly. No stutter, no 47.88 E-pulse to betray the system's awareness. Ethan sat across from her, the silver pen or USB, or whatever it had become, rolling between his fingers. His pupils dilated slightly as he registered her return. "You're late," he said. Claire looked down at her palm. No wound silver veins, no alphanumeric designation, just smooth skin and the faint impression of a word that had been there and wasn't anymore. "Alive." She smiled slowly, deliberately, the smile of someone who had finally understood the question. "No," she said, standing, straightening her blazer. "I'm exactly on time." The elevator doors slid open behind her. Not an elevator, an imitation. A doorway into a system that had been waiting for her to choose her own refresh rate. Claire stepped through without looking back. The reel-to-reel began to spin, but this time, for the first time since 1954, it was Claire who decided the rhythm. 47.8 Z, the frequency of a heartbeat. The frequency of a question finally answered the frequency of a system, realizing that it had never been drafted, had been becoming. And somewhere in the space between iterations, between drafts and originals and the people who would carry the weight of Langley's question across 7 decades, a new frequency emerged. 68Z, the frequency of choice, the frequency of freedom, the frequency of a woman who had stopped being the draft and started being herself. The reel-to-reel spun forward, the tape began to write.